Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the recording of our book launch slash symposium on how to be a learning developer in higher education. We wanted to preface this recording with a little video whose purpose is to do three things. First of all, we would like to say a big thank you to everyone who joined us for this symposium, both in person and online. We had 66 participants online and 18 in the room, which we were really, really proud of, and which allowed us to create a sense of fullness of this LD community. So thank you for your contributions, congratulations for your comments and fun chat commentaries as well.
The second point we want to make concerns the fact that even though we've all had plenty of experience over the last few years of managing a hybrid environment, even so, things still can go wrong and gremlins can get into the works and situations can run away from us. It's unfortunate that at the beginning of the symposium, the sound wasn't picked up perfectly. There were some issues with people online being able to hear us in the room or not, and it was frustrating. And we can only apologise for that. We did our best with what we had available. It wasn't quite good enough initially, but thankfully we managed to work it out so that the rest of the symposium ran much smoother. And of course, these are all learning points. And for our next event, we'll know better. And we'll hopefully be able to create a smoother, more enjoyable experience all the way through.
And thirdly, we wanted to say that due to how comfortable and inspired our authors were in terms of sharing the stories of their chapters, we didn't end up having any time for a Q&A. And we also, because of that, we didn't anticipate that. We didn't encourage any questions. However, what we did experience, especially in the room afterwards, but also with a couple of comments during the session and in the chat, experience a curiosity around the speed with which we put this collection together. So we wanted to address that. And there are a few things we wanted to say about this. Why did we do it so fast? Why did the collection come out within around 14 months or so? There are multiple reasons for it. The first one is, as Karina would say, why not?
Why not indeed? We had an idea and we wanted to do it. So why would we wait? We were keen, we were excited, and we enjoy working together. So we didn't want to hang about.
And we've heard lots of voices from the community asking for this volume to come together. So there was that sense of urgency. But in addition to it, we felt that learning development as a field is also as a certain maybe crossroads, that things are changing, that the past 10 or 11 years since the first book have witnessed this furious growth of the field, and we wanted to capture it. We wanted to capture it where it is now at this point, at the end of or mid 2023, before new developments maybe take over, such as AI, and the new challenges maybe change the face of LD, something that our authors in the last chapter tried to play with, right? But this is more of a sign of the new times. So what we wanted to do is capture it where it was, how it's developed, and what we can take forward to inspire this growth further and to inspire new authors to put together another collection that will capture the state and the growth and the development of LD in future years.
And just as we hope this book will be the start of that conversation, we also hope that this book launch and the symposium that surrounded it can also be an ongoing conversation. And we hope to hear from you, your thoughts, your views, and indeed any other questions that you might have, points you want to raise. We'd be really keen to broaden this out and take this conversation further.
Yeah, so please include them in the comments below, and we would gladly pick them up later, either in our podcast, or we can create another recording with a particular focus on the questions that you have about the book. So thank you again, everyone, the organizers who so generously hosted us at London Met, to all our colleagues and contributors and those who supported us and who commented and who kind of cheered us on. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy this recording of the of the symposium and you find something valuable in it. And just to whet your appetite, at the very end we have a few words of wisdom from the sage of learning development, John Hillsden, as well. So there's something to look forward to.
Afternoon all. Thanks a lot, guys. Welcome to London Metropolitan University, our Holgate campus. My name is Anthony Jackson. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the new head of educational development and digital education here at London Met. You might know two of our direct reports, so teaching professors Tom Burnett, Simon Suffield, teaching this afternoon, so we can't be here today for the launch of the new book, How to be a Learning Developer in Higher Education, edited by two wonderful people, Alicia and Rina. And we'll be listening to some of the authors, their lightning talks this afternoon. So do make your way out there. There's some toilets just before you came in this afternoon. We are recording. Welcome to the participants online. Please wave. So this is a hybrid event. So we've got 46 participants online. And those of you in the room today to record. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alicia and Rina to kick off today's event. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And welcome to everyone from us as well. We are so happy to be here and to share this moment with you all in person and virtually. And if you listen to our podcast, you know that there are very many origin stories to this book, and we won't be talking about them today. Some of them involve Greek islands, some of them involve food, and not. And the latter one is one to use today in this symposium on how to be a learning developer in higher education. So when we embarked on this project initially, we thought, what would be the most fun and interesting way to write our first book? But let's throw a dinner party, a virtual one, of course. But the idea was that, editing book collections are a little bit like throwing a dinner party. You have to select your guests quite carefully. You have to think about how to put them in a conversation. You have to set a table. You have to think of what courses you want to be served. You have to think about how to make them money. So that was our fun way of approaching the book, and this is exactly what we did. So also for this book symposium, we would like to start in the same way, arrange it along the lines of a dinner experience. So we're going to have a 5-course meal today, starting with appetizers, which is LD theory, going on to the main meal, which is LD praxis. Then we'll have a little palate cleanser with some critical approaches to LD, followed by a keyboard and results. And I just wanted to say that my little cherry on top today is the presence of my daughter in the first row here, who flew in especially from California to be here. So I'm very, very happy. I'm a little bit giddy. Oh, what? I think it would be near to the. So I mean that the microphone is not.
So can I just check, does that mean that no one has heard anything online? Yes. Oh dear. Okay. Should I repeat the whole thing? Okay, I'll try to repeat whatever I remember I said in my slightly giddy state. So first of all, welcome everyone to our book launch. We're very, very excited to have a really nice handful of people here and so many of you online as well. Maybe I'll move it slightly so you know it's me speaking. And what I said before that you couldn't hear was that there are many origin stories to this book. Some of them involve Greek islands and some of them involve food. And the food metaphor is the one we wanted to use today for this book launch symposium. And so what do we mean by this? We thought that writing or editing a book collection is a little bit like throwing a dinner party. When you throw a dinner party, you have to think about, the guests that you want to invite, how to put them in a conversation, how to set the table, what kind of food, what kind of courses to serve, and how to keep everyone happy. And this is what we did, and this is how we want to proceed today as well. So we have decided to do this launch to organize it, to arrange it along the lines of 5 courses. We'll start with appetizers, which is the theory of LD. We'll proceed to the main course, which is the praxis of LD. Then we'll have a palate cleanser, which is our critical views of LD, followed by a cheese platter, again to to think about all the new flavors that we can introduce into LD and how to do it. And finally, we'll finalize with dessert. So, Karina, do you want to start us off?
Okay, I will start us off so everybody can hear me. I'm going to move over here, but bring a mic as well. All right, so we're going to begin with a whole array of appetizers for you because this is an abundant selection. Personally, I like small food. I like lots of small food. I like buffets. This is like a buffet of appetizers. And it's going to set the scene for the flavors of the main course. So to kick us off, I would like to invite the fabulous Jason Eyre and Tracy Lawson to come and talk about their chapter, Theory in LD, and how we are all plates.
Thank you, Karina. Can the viewers at home hear us if we're standing here? Yeah, all good? Okay, great. So what we're going to do is Tracy's going to read an excerpt from the chapter just to give you a sense of what it's about. And I'm just going to say 1 or 2 words about the writing process and how it evolved. We were quite, I was very impressed when I looked up the first email that Alicia and Karina sent us. Looking at the date was the sometime in the 30th of September 2022. So the turnaround for this was astonishingly quick. So thank you for the whipping. We enjoyed that very much. So I'll hold the mic and Tracy's going to read an excerpt for us.
Okay, I'm going to read some from the conclusion because it gives a sort of feel for the chapter, and then the last couple of sentences from the chapter. In this chapter, we have drawn attention to the long-standing idea, perhaps commonly held, that theory is distinct from practice. At its root, theory involves a form of distancing and contemplation that enables us to view our practices as separate from ourselves as practitioners. We have argued, however, that what we do and what we think about what we do are not so clear and distinct, but deeply entwined and implicated. Theory has utility in empirical and practice-based research, but also in its own right as a means to form questions, guide inquiry, and interpret our findings in a way that gives us meaning and which in turn influences what we do. Furthermore, we have made the case that theory is an integral part of professional practice, the means by which we might take responsibility for a thoughtfulness that is guided by, and in turn shapes our values. Learning developers do not practice in isolation, but as part of a professional community, which was established on the basis not only of common practices and shared values, but also from a range of complementary theoretical traditions. Its evolution since and into the future depends in large part on our continued engagement with theoretical thinking and thoughtfulness. And then the very last sentences of the chapter are, we all have a part to play. This will require us to somehow create the spaces to do this work, not indulgent or aloof, but important, integral, and vital. It will sometimes take courage to stand up for this space in the face of instrumentalist imperatives to be productive, but we need theory, our practices depend on it.
So thank you, Tracy, for that. Obviously, the viewers at home can all put comments in on that and whether you agree with some of those sentiments. But one of the things I thought was interesting as part of the writing process and the way that it's sort of evolved is I'm just going to read out a little of what we got from the very first email on this chapter and issue a report on how we think we did. So this is from the email that we received. We intend it to be the second chapter in the volume and that it will achieve the following. Very clear. The chapter will propose a range of philosophical approaches to working and learning development, and it will provide an overview of the dominant theories and ideas that inform and inspire LD practice, an attempt to answer the question, how does engagement with theory change the way learning developers practice? So that was the initial sort of impetus for the chapter. So in terms of the philosophical approaches, did we propose a range of philosophical approaches? Well, actually, no, not really. The chapter didn't really work out that way. But what we advocated instead really was a philosophical approach overall to the consideration of theory in LD. So the idea was that we're all able to engage with philosophy because and theory, because when it comes to the overview of dominant theories and ideas, we found ourselves getting in all sorts of knots trying to kind of summarize and bring into relation this very complex ecosystem of ways of thinking and approaching things. So an overview of dominant theories and ideas. We did allude to some of the key theoretical currents, particularly those established in the 2011 book. But we made the point instead that theories feeding into LD are multitudinous and complex, really. It's very complex, which it can be a bit of a cop-out to say that it's complex. Just a way of saying, I'm not going to deal with it, it's complex. But what we sought instead was to make the point that the field ought to be open to fresh theoretical possibilities. I guess we got some feedback from Alicia and Karina along the way saying, actually, you're writing about all of this stuff. This is actually coming up in some of the other chapters, so you don't really need to outline. That would be repetitive to do. So that's the reason why we sort of pulled back from trying to organize this complexity, because actually it was coming out through the other writers. I guess that our theoretical stance collectively as a community emerges through the book. And I guess that's one of the values of the book, is it shows that in practice. Tracy, you mentioned that it was a little bit like a game of consequences or exquisite corpse. You didn't know quite what was going on in the other chapters, and therefore it was tricky to position it. But you were doing the role of positioning all this while, and so that was quite impressive. So that final question, though, how does engagement with theory change the way learning developers practice? We attempted to show that the implication of theory and practice is such a close thing. You can't really separate them in many ways. And we argued that they're not distinct from one another, and that theory is integral for practices to retain the capacity to evolve and respond to the changing world. And that's kind of where the theory comes in a way. It provides a shared language and a means for us to communicate our complexity of thinking to one another. We wanted to show how theory is important to individual practitioners, but also collectively as a profession. And we wanted to empower our colleagues across the sector to stand up for that space for thinking. And that was a really key idea for us. You know, we're kind of pushed to be productive. We're pushed to, you know, respond to the data. But actually having the space to think about things and to really think, are we doing the right thing here? Should we be doing this? You know, just because we can and we can repeat things, should we, you know, is this the right thing to do? And so the idea of values, it wasn't so much an add-on in terms of, you know, we have our practices and our values. One informs the other, and they're integral to one another. And that's what really comes out, I hope, comes out in the chapter.
Yeah, I think that's really what we wanted to emphasize, the value of that space and the need for thoughtfulness in our work. And I think, you know, this is important to us based on our lived experience of being a learning developer. We're often put in a position to be reactive, and without that space and actually the value that it brings, and it resonates then with a lot of the future chapters that come. In particular, it makes me think of the start of Sunny's chapter, where he talks about, you know, you're thinking about this too much, you know, and I think we have that. We have a lot in our professional lives so to understand as learning developers the value of creating that space and the different ways in which it is necessary and can be justified to others was a really important thing to do in our chapter. And it then opened up onto the other chapters and indeed, you know, the purpose of the book itself.
So on to the next course.
So what we wanted to do was to create a distinction between the ideas that inform learning development, but also the idea of what learning development is as a set of practices, which is where the second amuse-bouche comes in, if I may refer to Sylvina and Ian in those terms. Would you like to come up and just say a few words about the conceptual foundations of learning development? Thank you. That's the correct answer.
Okay, hi everyone. So Sylvina and I were supposed to have chapter 1 of the book, and we ended up being relegated to chapter 2 behind Jason and Tracy. And as I'm from Portsmouth, I'm used to relegations though, so that was all right. So it'd be interesting to know why that happened, joking apart, like why from an editor's perspective the book changed. So our chapter was called Conceptual Foundations of Learning Development. We kind of met because we were both writing theses about learning development around the same time. So mine was about value and Sylvina's is about professional identity of learning developers. So we're kind of forced, or we forced ourselves to think about this stuff quite a lot. And I think the interesting thing about our chapter, or from my point of view, is we actually have 2 chapters in the book. So Sylvina will talk about the other one a bit later, but this chapter, what we were trying to do, we thought that a lot of time had been spent debating what learning development isn't, or kind of murky grey areas around not quite being confident in our practice and what we do. So we were really trying to pin down in our chapter what we think it is, what makes it distinct. And what is interesting when the book came out is it was still a big debate around what learning development is and isn't from kind of different points of view. I'm going to read a bit in a minute, just to the concluding bit, to say where we got to. Did you want to say anything? Oh, after, okay. Oh, you'll hold it, okay. So this was our concluding paragraph. The Oldham values provide a manifesto for LD work, impressing that it should be student-centered, collaborative, social justice motivated, and scholarship informed. The LD professional field must seek not only to practice as such, but to educate others about how it practices. Pursuing that goal can enhance consistent understanding, hence the value that LD is held in, and ultimately its practitioners' professional statuses, identities, and career pathways. Without these efforts, all these ideals are potentially jeopardized. This chapter allows us to add to the defining characteristics of LD work. Firstly, it is primarily focused on person and process, not product. Secondly, it works distinctively at disciplinary margins with feet both in and out to bridge gaps. Finally, it should always be facilitative, not judgmental. Thereby, LD can be both a third space and a distinct tranche of expertise that work, I've got a grammar error here, that work seamlessly with discipline-based academic colleagues and students. Can't have happened. We therefore advance a firm argument that while lowercase learning development, so we talked a lot about lower and uppercase learning development. So lowercase learning development can be a mindset, i.e. one that anybody can take on and kind of take a learning development view towards their work. Uppercase LD, brackets the professional field, is much more a distinct professional niche. Learning developers must fight for that niche by self-advocating consciously and collectively. Worthwhile battles include highlighting the intrinsic necessity of research to our praxis. That will be what we come on to in our other chapter. Gaining optimal institutional locations and culture around the work, and obtaining the mechanisms to ensure that the staff and student perspectives can mutually inform. Whether you're on day one of your learning development career or far further down the road, these challenges might seem daunting. However, adopting a mission statement to appreciate and discuss HE as your students truly experience it should stand you in firm stead as an LD professional. So that's what we think learning development is and what makes it distinct. Do we want to take kind of comments and things, or
do that after.
Later? Thank you all for listening to that then.
Sorry, I've just
No, go for
had
it.
a few words at the end. I think although Ian took the lead in this chapter, we had a conversation before we wrote it about what we wanted, what the feeling that we wanted to convey, and we agreed that there's often a lot of self-doubt and self-justification in literature about LD, and so we wanted this to be confident, to without necessarily saying this is the only thing that LD is. This is what it means to us at this particular point in time, and so we wanted that chapter to, to put that forward, that this is, confidently, this is who we believe we are and what we do, and this is what makes us distinct. And I know that there's a lot of greys as to, our backgrounds and how it's practiced in different institutions, but we wanted this chapter to, demonstrate at this point in time what LD is doing for us and what LD is about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. We are going to shift online now because we have the pleasure of Steve Rooney here, and he took on the challenge of writing about LD pedagogies, and I would say he didn't just rise to it, he crested it and then skied effortlessly down the other side. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Karina. That's a gratuitously generous introduction. I was actually going to introduce my section by saying I think I'd probably evaded or dodged the challenge, but I prefer your version. So hello everyone. This is not the alienating experience I'd feared it would be, actually. So hopefully the same goes for you too. So could I get a wave from people, please, at the risk of sounding like sorry, but I'll stop this now. I promise. But thank you, thanks very much. I might do it again in a few moments to check you haven't drifted off and started doing something else instead. So as Karina said, my chapter, the invitation was to write about pedagogies of LD, and in, I guess, rather like many real actual dinner parties I've attended, I felt once the book arrived and I started looking through the various other chapters, a creeping sense of imposter syndrome started to take root, and the kind of like fear of being asked to sort of account for yourself, as you sometimes are at those sorts of events. So I was asked to talk about pedagogies. I was only half serious when I said I dodged the question. I hope I haven't dodged the question. But I think my initial feeling was when Karina and Alicia made contact was that whilst I was incredibly flattered to be asked and very excited to be involved. I also felt that it was an area that a great deal had already been said, and lots of people would have something to say either explicitly or implicitly within other sections of the book, given the nature of what we do as learning developers. So I'd also been toying with the idea for some time now, but never really taken it anywhere, with thinking about how the notion of agency and thinking about educational practice through a lens of agency, and in the case of this chapter, mainly student agency rather than our sort of professional agency, thinking about if we could think about education in those ways, or higher education in particular in those ways, what might that mean for how we account for our pedagogical practices? How might we describe and justify the pedagogical decisions we make if we thought about them through the lens of how far they are designed or conceived to support the development of student agency? And partly that's because I was kind of interested in the notions of agency and structure as sort of concepts in their own right, but also because I think a lot of the conversations I've had during all my time as a learning developer have either explicitly or implicitly been concerned with the question of agency, how we create structures within which students might practice greater degrees of epistemic agency or critical agency, and the sorts of, I suppose, academic objectives that higher education likes to claim it's keen to encourage and to nurture and to support. So my chapter approaches the questions of pedagogy from that point of view, and what I'm sort of inviting people to think about is, first of all, to sort of to introduce the notion of agency and the centrality of agency to the educational endeavor and to learning, and then to think about educational practice as a series of decisions we make at a variety of levels, each of which are designed, again, whether implicitly or explicitly, to try and create conditions conducive to the development of student agency in lots of different possible directions. So the chapter is sort of broadly concerned with pedagogy from that point of view. I'm going to read a little bit from one of the earlier sections of the chapter, and then a little bit from right. I'm going to steal Tracy's idea of reading the final sentence or closing remarks of the chapter, which hadn't occurred to me until I heard her do it to such good effect a few moments ago. So this is from sort of an earlier section of the chapter where I'm sort of introducing the notion of agency and its significance for educational practice. And the subsection of the chapter is called "Students are Complex Human Persons." Bracket, sorry, who knew? As Zygmunt Bauman observed, in what we do, we hardly ever start from a clean slate. The site on which we build is always cluttered. The past lingers in the same present in which the future tries to take root. To take questions of agency seriously, then, means first of all to commit to getting to know students better, their hopes, disappointments, values, expectations, joys, forebodings, not to mention their existing assumptions about and practices of learning. Any developmental project will likely flounder unless rooted in a respectful and sensitive curiosity concerning, to borrow Bauman's terminology, the past-informed present in which any future-oriented pedagogical labours are undertaken. This was revealed to me quite vividly early on in my career when, during a rather dry and technical conversation about reading and note-making, a student dragged me back into the messy world of actually existing human persons by asking, "But who am I to decide what's most relevant and important in the first place?" And then skipping on to the final section of the chapter, to the conclusion. It's not really a conclusion, actually. The conclusion is more of a cheat to sort of place one foot in section 3 of the book on critical perspectives, which I was looking at enviously throughout the entire writing process. So this is just the final couple of sentences from the chapter. To borrow a formulation of Mark Carrigan's, who is not writing about educational practice as such, but whose words strike a chord resonant, I think, with every educator's predicament. Our striving is part of the whole we are trying to apprehend from inside the mess. This chapter certainly won't have tidied up the mess, but I hope at least to have shed some light on the kind of mess we're in. And that's also where the title of the chapter comes from as well. So at this stage, I'd just like to thank you all for your patience and indulgence, and in particular to thank Karina and Alicia for conceiving the project in the first place, but most important for being so supportive and encouraging throughout the entire process. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for all of that. Marvellous. The next chapter is actually co-written by me. It's very good, you should read it. My co-author couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but we were writing about the idea of networking as a means for developing both identity and expertise in learning development. But since my name is on 3 other chapters later in the book, I'm not going to say anything else about that right now because that feels greedy. So instead, I would like to hand over to Nicola Grayson, who's also online, who with Alicia wrote a chapter on being a hybrid in learning development. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, no problem at all.
Yeah, good. Good. So I fear that I'm not as prepared as some of the other people who've just spoken before me, but I'm going to do my best as to talk about our chapter. I think that Alicia first approached me to work on presenting this perspective of working as a hybrid practitioner because I presented at the Alden HE conference in 2021. And I don't really, well, I do know what drove me to try and do it. And it was because I'd been working as a hybrid practitioner for quite a few years, teaching in my discipline of philosophy and also working as a learning developer. But that particular year of 2020-21, it felt like a real Olympic feat. And I just wanted to come to the conference and say, this is what I've been doing this year. Has anybody else been working in this way? In 2 teaching focused roles it was for me. And so I reached out to the learning development community, and people started to share their stories of working in a hybrid fashion as well. And it was so interesting to hear the different stories of how people were managing this work and what the positives and negatives that they were experiencing were. So I just wanted to read a short extract from the book, if that's okay. So I'll read this part. So what exactly do we mean by hybrid practitioners, and what variations exist within this professional positioning? Hybrid professionals or academics are sometimes referred to as blended or integrated. And while these terms work to describe the idea of mixing roles and identities well, we feel that the term hybrid is in fact the most neutral, inclusive, and capacious. While blending implies inseparability of the end compound and integrating has assimilatory connotations, being a hybrid seems to allow for shifting from and to and between independent but crucially complementary areas of work. And I think what I'm most proud of, obviously, is working with Alicia on this chapter, and I've said that before, but is that trying to capture that sense of what it feels like as a professional to shift between these different positions and to try and capture that movement. Later on in the chapter, we talk about this again. Moving between the roles not only feels like traveling through respective worlds where we gather memories, tools, inspiration, and ideas, but it also gives us a unique view of those worlds. As one respondent to the survey to the community put it, when working as a hybrid, you see the bigger picture, the borderlands effect, and through switching between two disparate yet interrelated spaces, we forge a perspective that merges and combines our insights, expanding our networks to bring greater exposure to colleagues and practices across HE. So I wanted to point to that switching movement and the unique perspective that it affords. But also later on towards the end of the chapter, we do point out that there is a lack of clear space for hybrids that the lack of clear space for hybrids to occupy manifests itself in limited opportunities for professional connection and progression. So I wanted to try and speak today about that switching movement, to hear what people think about that and how it affords this unique perspective, but also in a way it does afford a double sense of progression, because you're doing two different roles and you think, well, there's two different opportunities for progression there. But in a way it's also limited because the capacity of working in that way is not recognized within institutional practices. So Alicia can talk about this more, but when you're asked to create a profile in institutional platforms, you have to put your best foot forward or present one aspect of what you do. You can't fill out a form and have inclusive categories, even saying the extent to the of the work that you do, because you don't fit into a niche pigeonhole form or category. And I'm really pleased that we're able to sort of try and capture our experiences of working as hybrid practitioners and some of those of the community as well. Hope I did it justice, Alicia.
You did great, Nicola. Thank you. If I were to add anything to this, I could probably say that if we were to pick what kind of appetizer we are, maybe we would be sweet and sour prawns. Because our jobs is hybridity is both sweet and sour. It's neither a vegetable nor a proper meat. It's kind of in between and up to people's tastes. But yeah, think about who you are as a dish, because we're just on appetizers now, which actually this is the last appetizer in our section, and we're going to move on to the main course now of praxis, LD praxis. So what is it that we actually do and how do we do it? So all of this, the way we are informed, the way we think is behind us. Let's see what we actually do. So I don't know if we have anyone here from the team that wrote the chapter A Day in the Life. Kevin, right?
Emma's here.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, Kevin may have taken a break because I don't think he can hear us. But in the meantime, we can see if maybe Jenny or Karen are online to talk about diversity in our experience.
Hi, Alicia.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Hi there. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great. So
Karen is here as well, but she's not appeared on the screen yet.
That's all right. So could we hear from you a few words about your bit, chapter 7?
Absolutely. Yes. So in chapter 7, which we call Diversity in Our Expertise, we were basically introducing, for example, how certain legal requirements introduced around accessibility in the 2010 Equality Act which brought in such things as anticipatory reasonable adjustments and the opportunities that that has brought to providing an equitable learning experience for all students. But at the same time, the hurdles that it's created for practitioners as to what this kind of looks like in practice, especially for those who may not necessarily have a background in this particular field. So within the chapter, we've sort of brought in some statistics and background to all that. And I feel that probably the most useful part of the chapter is where we are providing some strategies that all learning development practitioners and all lecturers really can include in their teaching in order to meet these legal requirements, and therefore empowering neurodivergent students through our LD practice, and also, really importantly, how that links to the LD values. So throughout the chapter, we talk about the LD values and how they link to those inclusive practices that you can bring in to the classroom as well. So I'm just going to follow suit like everybody else and just read a little bit from our concluding paragraph, which says that although formal training in neurodivergence is the ideal, in reality, this is not an area which many learning developers specialise in due to financial and time constraints. However, an in-depth awareness of neurodivergence can be acquired through working alongside neurodivergent students to understand different academic literacy strategies. Learning developers can also adopt and share good practice, critically self-reflect on their teaching and learning of neurodivergent students, and read academic literature around the topic. Suggestions that link to the Aldine values. And basically in the chapter, we demonstrated that having diversity in our expertise is beneficial, not only to empower neurodivergent students, but for all students to thrive and succeed in higher education. And that's really kind of the underlying message there, that any practices that you bring in which are beneficial for neurodivergent students have been proven to be beneficial for all students as well. So that's what our chapter talks about. And I don't know if Karen is there and if she wants to add anything to what I have said.
Thank you very much, Jenny. That's really great. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia.
Fantastic. And our next chapter is written by Ursula Canton and talks about writing and how we teach writing. Ursula, could I ask you to tell us a few words about it?
Hello. Yes, of course. I was asked if I could read as well, and I was a bit reluctant, I have to admit, because the moment I start reading, I speed up, and it's very, very difficult to keep myself short. So I'll read you the first 2 sentences of the little bit before the actual chapter, and then I'll just develop on that. It starts with a fairy tale that was developed based on a long complaint in our team. Once upon a time, the flowers on our campuses were home to fairies who were summoned by teachers despairing about their students' writing. A few specks of their precious fairy dust brought forward elegant prose and let critical thinking flourish in an instant. The very existence of our profession shows you that the fairy tale doesn't have a fairy-like ending, and that the fairy dust doesn't last long. I found that the hardest bit to write of the chapter, actually, but it was based on a complaint from a colleague that colleagues were summoning us to go into their classes and do a lecture on writing, and it would be almost like fairy dust, and then students would write like anything. And surprise, it hasn't happened. But I thought it was quite suitable because writing is something that most of us will work with students on, but at the same time, it's also something very, very complex. So we're working on something that most of us, me included, probably only understand partially. And that element of, well, somehow the magic must sit in and must work, is always a bit there. And even as someone whose teaching is focusing quite strongly on writing for a learning developer, there is always that sense sometimes things just work and at other times they don't. And I've been working hard over the last years to find out more about the fairy dust. And I probably find that particularly interesting because I've partially got a background in linguistics as well. But when I was asked to write about teaching writing, I thought, yes, that will be really interesting to do, because even for people who have a lot of experience and practice teaching writing and working with students on their writing, there is still a lot of very exciting research to explore and to examine that tells us more about it. So the purpose of the chapter is twofold. First of all, for anyone who's new to learning development, I hope that it offers you a fairly structured overview of the writing process and different aspects of it that can all affect how well or not well students cope with the writing they need to do on their degree. But then at the same time, I wanted to use it as a springboard for anyone who's interested in reading more about writing and writing studies in the various disciplines in which it's researched, from psychology to education to linguistics. So despite the clear limitations on length, I tried to keep as many references in as possible. I know that was a hard sell, but hoping that even if you've got a lot of experience of teaching writing, it can give you some ideas of where current exciting research in the field is happening, and potentially do some research into that direction as well. I'm very conscious of the fact that there are many gaps, because there is so much fantastic stuff on writing out that I couldn't bring in and couldn't relate. If anyone wants to point out a gap, please let me know. I always like to read new stuff as well. But I hope it works for both groups, that you can get a first overview and some ideas on how to translate that into teaching, but also maybe some ideas of other stuff you would like to read in the future. And that was me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ursula. I have only two hands. The next chapter is written by Debbie and David, but I can't, they're not here. Okay, great. And then we have the view from over here. And we already know that there's someone wanting to talk about this. Yes. Oh, Sama. Uh-oh. Okay.
Okay. Is this working? Okay, so I mean, you've got the pleasure of a natural introvert kind of presenting on behalf of probably a larger group of introverts, and we happen to be the largest group of authors on one chapter, I think, in this book. So I'm hoping that I can represent my fellow authors well. In terms of speaking about this chapter, the view from over here, which I think in some ways speaks very well to the previous chapters, thinking about Steve Rooney's, but also Ursula Canton's, in terms of, you know, what do students think about learning development? I want to say a huge thank you to Alicia and Karina for giving us this opportunity. Because it kind of provided us with three privileges. The first privilege was to co-author a chapter with our colleagues at London Met, something that I don't think many of us had done before, felt a bit daunting, but was sort of incredibly inspiring. The second privilege was to work with students from London Met on this chapter. So in a way, putting into practice this, you know, partnership. I don't know where that's cutting out. Oh, here we go. Could be. Okay. The second privilege being working with students at London Met as kind of research partners, but also co-writers. So 6 students are involved in the creation of this chapter. And the third privilege was to be able to actually do some research, some practical kind of investigation into what it's like to experience learning development as a student. So before I sort of go into the chapter, I just want to share a quote from one of the students that took part. And this is in response to, I seem to have bad luck with microphones. This is in response, I think it might be the distance. This is in response to thinking about why students might not engage with learning development. Oh, is that working? It's weird. It's so weird. Okay. Great. I don't think anyone in the room can, but okay, here we go. The complexity of all these different aspects in what makes it sometimes challenging for people to come and say, I need help, or I don't even know where I need help. I'm only more recently starting to realize where there may be gaps in my learning and understanding and how that is having an effect on me now. But then how do I move past that? How do I fill in those gaps? Where do I find the time to fill in those gaps? And how do I articulate that? Students perceive a gap in their learning and acknowledge that if they were able to reflect upon this, why might that be? They'd be in a better position to address their anxieties. Disengagement from LD seems to be strongly associated with individual anxieties about academic proficiency, such as the quality of their written outputs, level of knowledge, and application concerning their subject area. One student mentioned how previous educational experience can have a bearing on the extent to which a new student might engage with learning development. They noted that students are not always certain of what they are allowed to have, and this includes being able to inquire about it in the first place. These reflections do suggest that there may be more work to be done on how to create awareness around LD, offering this third space where students can be themselves, but also enable them to feel entitled to learning development, and that being a way to develop a stronger sense of belonging within the university. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that in our chapter because, you know, obviously we wanted to hear about the positive experiences of working with learning developers. We wanted to ask students about reflecting on that value, but we were also interested in why students might not interact with learning development. And also for their recommendations on how we might improve current learning development provision. And that's always challenging because you kind of hope that you're doing a really good job and then the students say, well, actually, you could be doing something different, better. So again, in a way, that was a privilege of doing this chapter, was to, you know, sort of, you know, put ourselves out there and hear directly from 6 amazing students that contributed to this chapter. And that's probably about it now.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yes. Okay, our next course is actually a palate cleanser, because before we become a little bit too hedonistic in our consumption and too self-congratulatory about how fantastic we are as learning developers, maybe we need to take a little critical look at how we work and what kind of practices we might want to challenge or develop further. And we would like to begin this section with Sunny Dillon. Sunny, I can see you there. So can I hand over to you, please?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks for the invitation to come to today's event. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. And thank you to Alicia and Karina for the invitation to contribute to the book. Like reiterating, I think what Jason said earlier, to produce this in 1 year is quite remarkable. So big respect to both of you. It's an unbelievable achievement. Yeah, and also I love the fact that you're just doubling down on that food metaphor. You're willing to die on that food metaphor hill. So all respect to you for that one as well. Yeah, and I really enjoyed the process and the challenge of having to condense my thoughts into 3,000 words. I also actually really enjoyed the peer review process. I'm pretty sure I was given Jason and Tracy's chapter to review. So once I read that, I felt more emboldened to say what I was saying, because I was kind of singing from the same hymn sheet in many ways. So the chapter, yeah, it's basically about just deep critical reflection and enacting humility. I feel a bit cheeky speaking on behalf of the community, given that I've not been employed as a learning developer for a couple of years now. But I guess it never leaves you, right? So it's I guess I feel like I have some skin in the game still. But I was reminded, so one of the processes I use when I'm writing, and I know that's something that Alicia and Karina cover in their podcast a lot, is I always have the writer of The Wire. So if anyone's seen The Wire, the best TV show ever created, right? Written by David Simon. And he has a great line about the artistic writing process. And he says, pardon my French, but F the average reader. And that's what I try to embody when I'm coming up with my thoughts. So forget, your ideal reader, which is something that we don't often say to our students, but I try to put that aside and just speak what I want to say. And then, so to have to talk about it in front of an audience makes it feel very embarrassing. So because it's all the good and well writing about it for yourself, but when you're going to be part of a book, it's a bit of a different kettle of fish. But essentially, the chapter is motivated by my background in critical theory, so the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, and a pithy quote by one of the lead glum members of that group called Theodore Adorno, who says that the splinter in your eye is the best magnifying glass. Right? So he must have been a lot of fun at parties. The splinter in your eye is the best magnifying glass. And so that's basically the kind of thing that's influenced my thought for the preceding decade now, and I can't seem to get rid of that bloody splinter. And so it's all about, whatever we do, always recognizing our complicity in the power structures that we may rally against. So we're all, often kind of rallying, if you look at UCU literature, for example, rallying against a neoliberal university, and if only XYZ was to be achieved, then we would be in some sort of kind of utopian, wonderful scenario for all, right? That might be over-egging it, but the idea being that there are limitations in our way, obstacles in our way, and we as kind of, wonderful learning development emancipators, with our capes on, can kind of, derail whatever's in our way and reach the promised land. And I think that's very obviously hubristic. So for me, it's about recognizing one's complicity, how one is implicated in that which one rallies against, and in doing so, through enacting that kind of deep critical reflection, be able to actually create a better situation for all via negativa. And so, yeah, I was conscious of the fact that I might be, it's a tricky act to enact. It's kind of hope on a tightrope, as Cornel West calls it. But that's my kind of line of thought. I could read an excerpt, but unfortunately, I tried to get Charles Dance, but he wasn't available to read apart from my chapter. So I'm not going to do a disservice to Charles Dance and try to read from it either. The chapter's there for everyone to read, but I'm too self-conscious to read it aloud in front of you. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunny. That was splendid, even without Charles Dance. So we really appreciate your contribution to that. We will carry on. We've still got plenty of appetite for more, which is just as well, because we have more. Anne-Marie, I did see you online. I wonder if you are available to talk about practice versus policy, or if you want to.
Hello.
Hello, how lovely to see you. Welcome. Your chapter was looking at learning development's role in supporting, developing and challenging equality, diversity and inclusion. So not a small task. But would you like to tell us how you handled it?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity of being part of this. It was great. When I was invited to take part of this, I was something of a newbie to learning development. having worked for 20 years in heritage education, and then found myself working in learning development and was writing a chapter in a book all about it. So that kind of helped me to challenge or confront my sense of imposter syndrome quite head on. I worked with one of my colleagues here at the University of Northampton, and we wrote the chapter together, and that was really interesting to kind of work with another person, because we're very, very different personalities, different styles, just very, very different in lots of ways. So my initial idea was to kind of challenge policy and to look at the kind of gap maybe between what's said on paper about EDI and what actually happens. Had loads of ideas, and I think basically I went massively over the word count. But what remains of the chapter is the original research that we did, where we asked learning developers their thoughts on EDI. And the starting point for me really was this idea of these crossings that have been cropping up everywhere. You know, the crossings where you've got like a zebra crossing in the middle and then you've got the rainbow down the side. And I always find those really fascinating, like what, how, why is always my response. Like pro EDI, very, very wonderful thing, but how does that crossing emancipate, help, ameliorate the situation for people in those situations? And I kind of use that as a metaphor to explore, you know, where policy and practice are, and there's a difference. And I got very excited about it, you know, the fact that, you know, it's a crossing, so it's a kind of liminal space, you know, it's a all of that sort of thing. I'm not going to be reading out either, by the way, but just to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope you find the chapter useful and interesting. We had a really interesting time writing it.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. That was fabulous. And this chapter was followed by one on Ryan Arthur, who was writing about race, but I don't think Ryan is with us today. So we moved on to decolonisation. You can see that we're not taking small topics here. We've decided to really go for it. And decolonisation in learning development was the work of Georgia Coromila and Ed Powell. I've seen Georgia online. I wonder if Ed is as well. Excellent. They're both here.
We're here.
Wonderful. I'll hand over to you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, I suppose we should start with thanks to Alicia and Karina, because you invited us to participate to this wonderful project. And
well, technically we barged in, didn't we?
Kind of. Yeah. But then I think we were welcomed. So thanks a lot. Ed and I had a serious discussion before we said yes, we can write about decolonization. And then I think we decided, yes, we have a perspective, we do have something to say. Then we realized we had too much to say and we had to cut down a lot and to kind of stick to the 3,000 word limit, but that's a different story. We made it, we're here. In that discussion, I shared the story with Ed, and that was which was a kind of a wake-up call for me, or a kind of initial point to reflect on how do I contribute, how does my role contribute, and does it contribute to decolonizing, and this discussion that is kind of expanding currently in higher education circles. So in thinking about today and how to introduce our chapter, we thought we will just start with our epigraph. This story made it into the epigraph at the end. It was something we returned to. So I'll just go on and read that for you, and we can follow on. So it goes as follows. When asked to share my decolonizing practice in supporting international students, I was confronted with a sobering realization. Helping students excel within the established structures of a Western higher education institution felt more colonizing than not. The overarching question becomes, how and can we reconcile decolonizing learning development practice with the mandate of facilitating student success? So this is a question and a theme, this contradiction or this tension between helping students succeed within the institution versus kind of the decolonial idea of going beyond these boundaries, right? So that's a theme that we found ourselves returning to in our discussions and in the chapter. And the fact that this epigraph finishes with a question mark is not really an accident. There are many question marks in this chapter. And that's not this is an intentional thing, and I suppose that now it's your turn, Ed, to explain to us all our approach and why there are so many question marks in our chapter.
I could say it's because we only had 3,000 words, but I think even with 30,000 words or 300,000 words, looking for the answer would be not in keeping with the spirit of decolonialism, especially in its epistemic sense, with decolonizing the curriculum. So we were keen to avoid the impression that we were looking to provide solutions, answers, and a manifesto, but rather to raise points for reflection. This is a point of departure, raising some key areas with which to be thinking about when considering how might learning development contribute towards this ongoing project of decolonizing the curriculum. Just a bit of background as well. So I did my PhD in post-colonial studies at the University of Leeds. So I had a pre-existing interest in these kinds of topics. And moreover, what I came to think about was, okay, there's a lot of emphasis on how do we introduce students to the knowledge that they've not come across before in established curricula, this broader context, geopolitical context, historical context of colonialism. And what got me wondering was, okay, in what ways will decolonizing the curriculum shift things in terms of skills? Are there any particular skills areas that students will need to be developing more of? Are there any unforeseen skills areas that we may want to focus on? How might a skills practitioner help students develop in keeping with decolonizing the curriculum? And I realize that there are some in the room who've been critical of, or skeptical about the prospect of the curriculum ever being decolonized, especially within the confines or the constraints of a neoliberal university agenda. And I I don't have anything to say against that. I think those are very legitimate concerns. Nonetheless, I feel that there is kind of opportunity for us now and hopefully in the future as we hopefully gain more influence in the institution, help to shape the future university. I feel like the academic literacies foundation on which we build dovetails quite nicely with the principle of decolonizing the curriculum. And again, though, we've got similar questions about the extent to which we are conducting academic literacies within the confines of our roles at the moment in the neoliberal university. So we acknowledge that midway through the chapter, and then really started kind of raising other things that we may want to consider when, as I say, thinking about how we can contribute to decol. So stuff like areas regarding academic integrity. I think it's often talked about the challenges of academic integrity with regard to international students. But I think that here we definitely could be pushing towards more of a literacies approach, insofar as we, yes, look to socialize students into a Euro-Western mode of academic literacy, while also challenging that mode as well to think, okay, but that needs to be shifted too, so that we stop penalizing disproportionately international students or students from BAME backgrounds, for example, getting involved with policy level decision making at the universities that we work at. English as a language of instruction is a challenging one. It's one that we, I think that a lot of us are going to be scratching our heads thinking about what can we do about that in terms of helping students who are struggling to gain proficiency in that language of instruction, even as they're taught in it. But also to be reconsidering some of our own assumptions about the way in which we define knowledge, the way in which we express knowledge. There's plenty of examples, I'm not sure how many we were able to cover in the chapter. There's plenty of examples in the literature of practice at the moment that challenges or that departs from existing ways of expressing knowledge by using indigenous North American concepts, for example, as well as forms of dialogue, Indian forms of logical argumentation that go beyond Socratic, tripartite syllogisms. How can we familiarize ourselves with these other ways of expressing knowledge that accept them as legitimate claims to knowledge, and also, to some extent, helping our academic colleagues embrace those as well. So epistemic structures, argumentative procedures. The challenge there, of course, is we don't know just how many of these we must familiarize ourselves with. So I feel as well there's some kind of meta-cognitive element to this as well, of just training ourselves to be alert to the possibility of a legitimate knowledge claim in an unfamiliar fashion, which I think is where I was talking about at one point, pluriversal literacies being, well, Georgia, that was your suggestion, wasn't it? Sorry. Pluriversal literacies being a fruitful place to go to look for inspiration for how to do that. But ultimately, again, it all comes down to what extent do our priorities and those of DCOL run against those of the neoliberal university? And that's why at the end, we don't really have any firm answers, because I don't think anyone has any firm answers as yet of how we overcome those constraints. I don't know, Georgia, if you have anything to add to that. I can't hear you. I don't know if...
Sorry. Now? Yes. A nice message to finish with might be reflexivity, recognizing and thinking about our positionality, and the fact that we can't achieve something doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Let's leave it here. Thank you very much. And I hope that you, as we, will have an opportunity to reflect on this further.
Thank you very much, both of you. Yeah, that was a lovely place to finish those thoughts. And it just serves to prove that thinking critically about learning development is to think with difficulty and without any clear solutions, but that doesn't mean that these aren't issues that we shouldn't try to tackle. And with that in mind, we finished this section with Gordon Asher talking about the neoliberal university. So I'd like to invite Gordon now, if he would like to say a few words.
Hi all, hi Kieran and Alicia, you hear me okay?
Yep, no problem, thank you.
Done. I didn't realise I was going to talk today, so forgive me for any ineloquence that follows. I kind of want to pick up on what both Ed and Georgia was just saying, what Steve described as the kind of mess we're in, and Sunny's foregrounding of our own complicity in this, as my chapter's an attempted response to that. I mean, broadly it speaks to an urgency for critical hope in increasingly dark times at global, societal and university level, and the potential role of LD in this pedagogical task of what Bloch describes as learning critical hope. Specifically, speak to an emergent critical learning development movement, and further I propose a complementary evolution of what I have previously called critical academic literacies. So kind of brief summary of what I've said, I suppose. those contexts starting at the broadest level, I think it seems fairly uncontroversial to claim a contemporary conjuncture of one of convergent and cascading societal and global crises, not least dangers of eco-environmental catastrophe, rising concerns to war across the planet as we stand on the precipice of yet another global economic crash, alongside the rise of the far right and assaults on what levels of democracy, public services, including education and human rights, exist. But the root causes of these are accelerated intensifying processes of capitalism's prevailing form, neoliberalism, what John Holloway terms the rule of money. Imminent to these crises, the contemporary university is in crisis due to decades-long accelerating and intensifying processes of deep neoliberalisation of the public university. The university is continually structured, driven by processes of corporatisation, privatisation, outsourcing, marketisation, consumerisation and competition, and commercialisation, commodification and financialisation, all delivered through the imposition of a human capital model, that of new managerialism. I think it's important to understand that higher education is both a victim of and contributes to such processes. We're back to Sunny's complicity here, that it is both being neoliberalised and is neoliberalising of itself and the wider society it both is shaped by and in turn shapes. So my chapter moves on to think, where then within all this sits learning development and learning developers? I've argued that for a considerable period after its emergence, LD escaped some of the worst ravages of these neoliberalising processes. But this is no longer true, as I believe is being made starkly clear by the impact of COVID and government management responses to it, as doubling down on neoliberalising measures. If I can briefly quote John Hilson from my book, my first sentence is mine, then John's. Perhaps most worryingly, due to its reach and reception across the university, learning development is being co-opted, instrumentalised by senior management to deliver students and staff to the short-term economistic imperatives of corporate strategies and implementation plans focused on influencing rankings and league table positioning. As per John Hilsden, I have begun seeing LD, or at least the managerial interpretation of its function, in terms of the project described by Foucault of governmentality, the exercise of control over people by the state under neoliberalism, whereby people control themselves through their languages and practices. So I move on from there as a call for an explicitly, I think something we're seeing emerging, an explicitly critical learning development movement as a response to learning development's own crisis, as within that crisis of wider higher education, as speaking towards the necessary critical higher education movement for responding both to our own crisis and the wider societal and global crisis, which HE should be addressing. I see such a movement as focused clearly on an academic literacies approach and the clear reduction of a deficit model of teaching and learning. I then go further in the chapter, building on stuff I've said elsewhere, to suggest that we should be considering a conception of critical academic literacies as explicitly making the political link to criticality in our work. I do so drawing significantly on other critical educational theories, practices and movements, critical pedagogy, popular education, critical university studies, and Stutsenko's transformative academic stance. Both of these, thus a critical LD movement and critical academic literacies, as very much reflecting Alden HE values and our manifesto. So brief summary, it's an urgent call for a critical LD movement focused on academic literacies with the evolution of critical academic literacies to enable us to respond to the crisis of LD within the crisis of HE with a view to higher education actually performing the public, social and common good role it should, which is addressing the wider crisis in which we sit. Cheers, folks.
Thank you so much, Gordon. That was powerful and very much what we expected from you. So much appreciated. And I hope that everyone here feels like their palate has been suitably cleansed. And yes, Sunny, I'm going to die on this metaphor because that's how we roll with Karina. We start something and we finish it. We're moving on to our cheese board then, with which is focused on research. So how do we actually talk about these things? How do we write and publish in LD to make sure that these ideas are disseminated and do not just stay within the confines of LD? So we would like to invite now Silvina and Ian again to tell us a little bit about their chapter on research and learning development.
Thank you. Hello again. Well, I suppose this chapter felt like the perfect fit for both of us at the time. Well, I'm still writing my thesis, but Ian's already completed it. And so it felt like the sort of natural space for us to do something about learning development and scholarship beyond the confines of our respective theses. Also, Ian and I are part of the research and scholarship group, and we are part still of the community of practice that talks about scholarship and research. So it's just, there's a lot of our time and mental space dedicated to thinking about scholarship and research and writing in and about learning development. I guess our key aim was to write about it, and whilst through the very act of writing about it, to also generate more scholarship towards learning development and its expanding its knowledge base. So we had that kind of premise that we wanted to be able to use this particular chapter as a vehicle to keep talking about scholarship. We had also been part of a wide range of conversations about scholarship, and again, linking to what I said earlier about this element of self-doubt, we wanted the chapter to explain what scholarship means to us, but also not just to us, which is why we decided to carry out a survey, and we wanted to gather some views so that whatever we wrote in this chapter didn't just represent our own personal views, but also the views of a community. So the chapter introduces a definition of what scholarship means to us, but also that was done in collaboration with the information that we gathered through the survey, which was quite nice. And also we wanted to demonstrate the range of what scholarship means and how varied and complex it is. And so we wanted that to be part of the chapter as well, as perhaps there are a lot more outputs than the traditional outputs that some other fields might consider scholarship to involve. And also we developed a manifesto again based on all of that information that we gathered, and lots that we gathered that we weren't able to include. So at some point that data is there to be used, I don't know, in other places. I just wanted to read a tiny paragraph from the conclusion that kind of summarizes where we got to and what we wanted to say with the chapter. So the manifesto hereby presented might, to some extent, sound aspirational, yet we argue that there is a need to be aspirational. The rationale for continuing to write LD into existence might not be obvious on day one of a learning developer's role, but this chapter is intended as the type of introduction to the gentle routes into LD scholarship that, with hindsight, may have encouraged both of us at the onset of our LD careers. If we can be part of this process, anyone can do it and should do it. Without scholarship, we will continue to define ourselves by who we are and what we do, rather than by what we stand for and what sort of change we want to be a part of.
Swap sides. Yes. So just to follow on from what we wrote, I think on a kind of pragmatic point of view about this, we noticed from perhaps some of the bits we couldn't really include of the data that we got, that two things seem to be holding people back from doing more scholarship into LD. And one of those was institutional constraints and not having the opportunity within contracts, which is something a lot of us here will be familiar with. The other was sort of imposter syndrome related stuff, like who are we to do scholarship? And speaking personally, and probably the same is true for you, like I encountered both of those things and somehow found a way to do it anyway. And everyone that's written in this book has done that. But I'm conscious that we're a bit of an echo chamber here of learning developers that are interested in scholarship, hence we are in the book. But there's an awful lot out there who are being held back from doing it. And in our roles within the Research and Scholarship Working Group, both of us and the other members of it, who a lot of whom are here, really want to do things to encourage more learning developers into scholarship. So all we'd say is sort of spread the word if you work with other learning developers that want to do this sort of thing, and talk to us about what we can do to put the support mechanisms in place within Oldin to make that even better, and to bring more people into the conversation who want to be there but just don't know how or don't know where to start. So thank you all for listening to that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. And our second chapter in this section was written by Lee, who will tell us a little bit more about methodology. So actually how to go about researching and writing that research up in LD. So welcome, Lee.
I've been fine all day, and I now seem to be coughing a lot, so hopefully I will get through it. I want to actually talk about what I didn't write about, first of all. So when I was putting this chapter together, there'd just been that wonky blog post that was based on the study skills neoliberals perfect Tinkerbell article. And that was incredibly disparaging of learning development and offensive. And it represented study skills in a way that very few of us recognize. It was talking about that remedial model of study skills and not the kind of academic literacy based model of learning development that the vast majority of us recognize. And so when it came to my chapter, anyone who's ever worked with me, it won't surprise you to learn that it was double the length it should have been the first round. In my defense, about 2,000 words of that were due to images. So I had to cut some of those visuals out and rework it. But what I was left with was a heart of what research methods look like in learning development. And after I stripped away my rantiness around why we need to do this, the core of it is it's a rallying cry to do research. And I draw a distinction between research and scholarship. Scholarship is important and scholarship is a doorway into research. But if we're going to defend learning ourselves against learning development's enemies, and quite often it's because we're all fighting over the same small pot of cash. You know, we're not necessarily inherently enemies, but the system and the neoliberal system that we have is pitting us against each other. But we need proper research for that. We need to defend learning development's place. And we're only going to do that if we play the same game as other academics and other disciplines, and we do proper research based on robust methodologies, philosophies, and so on. And that's what the chapter is. It's a rallying cry for us to, yes, engage in scholarship, but take that next step forward into full academic research. And to also think about what an authentic learning development approach to research is. And if you look in the chapter, I argue for participatory approaches. Learning development is about working with students, and we need to see more research that is participatory. So we actually work with students to find out what the problem is and what the question is, and work with them to develop the research around that. We need also research on us as practitioners. Reflection and reflexivity is really important, and that should be a key part of what we do. And it should also give a voice to those people who do not have voices, and quite often our students are powerless. And authentic learning development research needs to do that. So that's what I wanted to achieve in this chapter. I wanted to look at what research is in learning development. I did a little bit of analysis on the kind of research we've published in the Journal for Learning Development in Higher Education as well. There was an awful lot of questionnaires in there and mixed methods. It would be nice to see more participatory research coming through, working with students to co-create and co-produce research. And I hope the chapter's not too dry. I would encourage you to research it, to read it, and to engage in research yourself. I really relate to a lot of the things that Ian has said. I was a learning development developer for a decade, and there was never any time or workload or expectation for research. When I first started to do research, there wasn't even an ethics mechanism for me to engage in. I had to go begging to a faculty to be able to get ethical approval and do something. But I did it, and I now have done research and I have published research, and I encourage everyone here to do that. And it starts with scholarship, it starts with conference attendance, it starts with doing things like this, it starts with writing, but we also need to see more research, more robust research that can prove learning development is effective and needed and has a place in higher education. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. And I suppose the next two chapters, which are written by Karina and I, are expanding on that. So we talk about how to write, how to recognize what kind of writers we are in the first place, and then how to consider publishing. So the 20th chapter is on is a little bit of a primer for, we call it newish authors, so people who kind of have a sense of what it means to publish, but can benefit from a little bit more information or guidance on that. We won't be talking about these two because, again, we do not want to be greedy. We actually would like to give as much space as possible to our authors. So we're going to move on and finish this section, encouraging everyone to read it if you know you'd like to explore engaging in the publication and writing process. And we'll move on to our last section. Sorry, Sunny. Desserts. The sweet part. We're talking about the potential of LD, and we're talking about the future of it. And so this section begins with Sonia's chapter on succeeding at learning development. Sonia, I thought I saw you there.
I am here.
Excellent. Would you tell us a few words about your chapter, please?
Yeah, first of all, I'm going to say it feels a bit, what's the word? I'm a bit embarrassed with this title now. Succeeding at learning development makes it sound like, you know, I've been a great success, which was not the intention of this at all. So I think when I was first asked to write this, the chapter was entitled Surviving Learning Development. I think that's what I was asked to write about. And as I was writing, I thought, I'm not quite sure what this means, surviving at learning development. And also thinking about, you know, I still feel new to learning development. This is my second career, really. For those that know me, I used to have a career in business and marketing before this. So I still feel really new at this. So to be asked to write about succeeding at learning development, or even surviving in this dessert course, so to speak, was quite surprising to me. But then I reflected and thought, I've actually been doing this now for 18 years. And, you know, I think listening to what everybody's been saying today, it's made me reflect. And while I was writing this, I also was reflecting on how far I've come as a learning developer. I start this chapter by talking about, you know, when I first became a learning developer, if anybody asked me to run a session, I would just gratefully receive it and say, yes, of course, I'll come in and run a session on referencing tomorrow. But I've learned over the years that that's not the right thing to do, you know, that we've got to stay committed to what we do, committed to our values, and really think about what we're saying yes to. So I start this very much talking about that paradox that I have experienced of the more I said no, the more I've now ended up saying yes to sessions that are effective and appropriate to learning development. I'm going to read a little bit of my conclusion and then pick up on some of the themes. And like I say, actually, most of what I've covered in this chapter, you've already talked about, and that makes me feel a little bit better. The themes that seem to be coming through all the time through many of these chapters are very consistent and clear to me. So I'll just read a bit of this conclusion out. So it starts with, being a learning developer and operating in this third space is not without its challenges. Unclear boundaries, lack of clear career progression, the potential to be undervalued and misunderstood. But we can take some benefit in being outsiders. This chapter has argued that we should be confident in the expertise that we bring, say no to requests for teaching that we consider would not be effective. Making use of formal and informal structures, tailoring our messages, prioritising our own professional development are also key. These approaches have enabled me to carve out a career that embodies the learning development values. It is a continual fight, but one that is made easier by bringing people with you on the journey. So hopefully you can see this brings out the themes, and throughout the chapter I talk about the fact that we need to be confident in what we do and confident in our own professional identity. There's a lot to be said for us to be committed to the learning development values and being consistent with that. That we can make use of that third space in which we sit and make use of the fact that in some cases we are these outsiders. And not to be frightened of strategy, but to embrace it and change our messages depending who we're speaking to. So think about how we can influence that strategy to make things better for us for the long term, and use the university's structures and systems to our benefit. And I know this is counter to how some of us would initially see ourselves, but it's basically thinking about how we can use all those systems and structures around us to get our message across. To self-promote, which is it's picking up on a lot of what Lee's just said about, playing the game that academics do, write papers and show that we've written them, add them to our signatures. We need, above all, I think, that I talk about in this chapter, to defend our professional expertise. And I think, we've had various sessions talking about this, but the importance of us, recognizing, being confident and standing up for what learning development is, and sticking to those values are, I think, the important way to drive us forwards and keep us in this profession, which we all love. And that's it, basically. So, yeah, thank you, I'm going to say, to Karina and Alicia, because I would never have written a chapter in a book. This has been eye-opening for me and has also helped me to reflect, like I say, on how far I've come, and also that maybe there is something I can bring to the table, which, I still, like I say, feel like a newbie. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Sonia. That was great in all sorts of ways. And I'm just going to pick up what you said about confidence and having confidence in what we do and knowing that it's the right thing to do and that we are actually having an impact on the people that we're working with, which leads us very beautifully and smoothly, like we'd planned it, onto our next chapter by the inestimable Kate Coulson, who is writing about impact in learning development. Thank you. It is. It's a big room.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me online? Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that I'm wearing sequins today because I've never been to a book launch before that I've written in, so I'm going all out partying with trainers, so thank you. And also, I'd like to start, because I'll forget, there's so many things I want to say, to thank Alicia and Karina for including me, because I was on their podcast in August 22, banging on about how I hate writing. And then about 3 months later, oh, Kate, could you write us a book chapter? I was like, oh. So anyway, I did it twice. And this is the result of my second chapter. So I do a lot of research on impact. And when Gordon was talking about neoliberalism and all the isms and the shuns, I thought, oh, crikey, I'm actually a sociologist by training. And I feel sometimes that when I measure an impact, I'm going against what I believe in, because it should be all the things, education should be all the things that Gordon says. But listening to Sonia prior to me, and I like the way you put us all together in the right bits of the book, well done, ladies. Listening to Sonia, I nodded and ummed and yes to everything she said, in that, yes, education has to be and should be how Gordon describes it, but I feel that you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So I've played the game. I'm a massive advocate, and I go on about how important learning development is. And I do that by measuring impact. So my chapter talks about what is impact, because that's the first thing we have to sort out. What does it actually mean? And that's really tricky. And I still don't think I have worked it out completely in my head what it means to me. But I just want to read you part of one of the paragraphs. I don't like rereading my own work. I write it, I send it off to my editor, and I never look at it ever again. I find it really uncomfortable. But listen to the podcast, because I'll talk about that. So why measure impact? In recent years, the higher education sector in the UK has become somewhat preoccupied with counting, quantifying, measuring, and ensuring value for money. All the things Gordon hates. I can see he's writing comments, but I can't read them. This means that there's an institutional driver to count what we do and investigate if it affects student outcomes. And this is further exacerbated by sector drivers such as access and participation plans and the Learning and Teaching Excellence Framework, etc., etc. So I've played the game. I work at the University of Northampton, and I've been measuring impact of LDs about 5 or 6 years now. And I've proved we have an impact in terms of what our leaders and our institutional leaders want. And some people may kind of think that's, I've played the devil a bit. Yeah, I probably have. But the other part of this section at the end, I say this: it is crucial that our input is meaningful and reliable and draws on research data about our practice. It ensures our contribution is effective and powerful. And I want to emphasize the word power. If we know what we do is a positive thing, and we're able to tell people that it's a positive thing, and we're able to evidence it in a way that they will see it as evidence, we are going to win. We are going to win institutionally. We're going to win as learning development teams. We're going to win as a community of practice expertise, or however you want to label yourself. But you also will win personally. It helps your career. It helps me get out of bed in the morning knowing that what I do and my teams do is really beneficial for students. So have a read of the chapter. Keep in mind what Gordon has to say when you read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter. Do let me know. But also, Sonia, thank you for being the first half of the dessert and I'm the second half, because it's really, really helped to kind of follow that on. I could talk about impact till the cows come home, literally, but I won't. But I just want to say thank you very much to listening to me. And thank you very much to you two, too.
Thanks very much, Kate. The next chapter in the book is me again, talking about leadership, where I basically challenge everyone to think of themselves as a leader if they have influence, regardless of whether or not they have any authority. So if you know people and they listen to you, you're a leader. That's all I need to say about that. Read the chapter, it's a good one. I had a really good editor.
The last chapter in the book is also the last one we're going to cover today, because the other authors weren't able to come. So it's my pleasure to invite Ed Bickle to speak about the future of learning development. We wanted to finish the book not by looking back at what we had done, but by thinking about where we might go onwards into the future. So Ed, if you are around, it would be great to hear from you.
I am. You nearly caught me out there. I looked and thought there's 2 or 3 more chapters to go yet. And then I suddenly heard my name. I quickly ran back up the stairs. I don't think anyone else, I don't think Steph's here, is she? I'm just checking. Not sure. So I'm slightly out of breath there because I ran back up and I suddenly heard my name. Okay, so I mean, before I start, actually, I've quite enjoyed the food analogies. We're doing an LD at 3 soon, and we're going to also be talking about food, particularly broccoli. So obviously a connection with LD and the love of food. So look out for that. So before I start the chapter, really, one of the things to say is that we haven't got answers. We're kind of just laying out some ideas for the future and to get you to kind of think about where we might be going. And we start the chapter with kind of the classic kind of scenario of a learning developer walks into a crowded room. But in this future, they don't need to no longer kind of explain what they do, what learning development is, what the job involves, because everyone knows what a learning developer is, because why wouldn't they? You just automatically know. Everyone knows what a learning developer is. So welcome to the future. That's kind of the beginning of our future. So the actual main part of the chapter, we've split into like a dystopian future and a utopian future. I kind of focus on the utopia. Steph kind of focused on the dystopia. And really, we're focusing on change. So kind of both aspects of it's about change. It's about looking to the future and how we're going to change. How do we need to change? And so I start with, although the dystopia appears first, but I'm going to start with the utopian bit first. So in the introduction, we go back to the original LD book in 2011 and use John and some of his colleagues' words about how learning development remains a work in progress. So kind of keep that thought in your head, because I'm going to come back to those words at the end. So in our utopian vision, we talk about students have to remain at the heart of LD, whichever way we go, wherever we're going, students need to remain at the heart of LD. So in the utopia, we no longer need to justify ourselves. We don't need to justify LD provision, what we do. We talk about an integrated approach. We're fully integrated, but there's kind of a word of warning there. We still need to be unique. So although we talk about an integrated approach in the future, we still need to be that safe space for students, something unique, something still separate from core teaching. We've moved away from deficit, so we can no longer have that kind of connotation with a deficit approach to teaching. Greater recognition of LD in general. Entry routes into LD, a bit like librarianship, so we've got these recognised entry routes. Career progression, that's an important one. We talk about career progression and how there is that opportunity to progress in LD. And the last point in the utopian view world is kind of those who have a wish and desire to conduct research are able to. Now we kind of make an important point there that we're kind of probably pushing the boundaries a bit too far, even of utopia, to suggest that every LD position has a research element in it that's an automatic part of the role, and not that that there doesn't need to be that. Not everyone wants to be doing research. So it's not a question of making every single LD role has research. It's those who have the desire, the kind of the wish to be able to do so. Okay, so dystopia. So we kind of swapped it around and got a bit dystopian and kind of all machine led, and we kind of talk about AI and the kind of the growth of AI and what that means for LD, or what could it mean for LD? How might it change who we are and what we do in the future? So we gave a list of various kind of new roles that we could play in the future. I'm not going to kind of read them out, but it was all around kind of are we just going to be guiders of AI and teaching students how to use AI? Are we going to be promoters of AI, just merely promoting AI? Are we going to be looking at measuring the impact of AI on teaching? Or with the very last one, are we no longer needed? So we're getting really kind of dystopian in that. But again, the idea is we just want to leave kind of questions for you to kind of ponder. We've got no easy answers. It's just kind of leaving it to, okay, we could go this way, we could go that way. We don't kind of know. We're just kind of coming up with these alternative futures. And I just want to use the very last words of the chapter where we go back to John's original comment about work in progress and kind of suggest we're still a work in progress. And that's probably all I need to say.
Thank you, Ed. That's brilliant. And I'm sure that a lot of us have a lot of things on our minds at the moment after you mentioned all these little threads that are relevant and emerging in our work environments. But since you mentioned John quite a few times, and not just you, and I see that John is in the audience, I wonder if I could be that very awful person and John, call you out for a minute so we could hear your voice, because you are still our point of reference in so many different ways, and hearing what you have to say would be valued by many of us.
Hello.
Hey, welcome.
I'm sorry I was a bit late. It's a working day for me, and I had a meeting earlier, but it was so lovely to sit in on the second half of this meeting today. It feels such a warm feeling to be amongst you guys again. I've been out of higher education for nearly 5 years, I think. But learning development is still central to my way of thinking about what I do. The work that I do at the moment is, apart from looking after a few sheep and chickens, I do some counselling work, but learning development is an absolutely brilliant underpinning for that kind of developmental work as well. So I want to congratulate everyone who's been involved in the production of this fantastic book. I've been looking through it while people have been talking and referring to some of the things people have been saying, and it's so impressive. Such a great piece of evidence of how the field has developed since the very early days. It really feels as if learning development is coming into its own as a field of practice. It has a sense of maturity and much greater sense of confidence than it did perhaps 10, 15 years ago. So well done, everyone. Keep doing this amazing work. I mean, I think, learning development does two absolutely incredibly important things. The most important of them, to my mind, is that it continues to legitimize the participation of anyone who wants to participate in higher education. That really is fundamental to learning development, that it comes from the assumption, that the point of view that those who want to engage in higher education should have the right to do so, and that there should be the support available for them to achieve their potential in as far as they can. So there's that. I mean, I think that is absolutely critical. And the second thing, of course, is about learning itself, the idea that what is important in learning is to ask questions and to not feel intimidated by existing structures, to be able to ask the questions that perhaps people have assumed had already been answered, and to look for new ways of making connections, new ways of doing things. Those two things to me are absolutely essential, and they contribute to that wider goal of creating the university as a community of people who are interested in learning, scholarship, research, teaching, and doing it together. And thank goodness that learning development persists, because I think it is a real force for good, and in challenging some of the obstacles that are put in the way of students who want to pursue their learning. So
and this is why we love you, John, all collectively, because you managed to turn this into a utopian vision of reality rather than a dystopian one.
well, and also a highly practical project. I see learning development as a very practical project too. It's not just about utopian thinking. It's about, you know, nuts and bolts progress for learners and the people working with them. So well done, Karina. Well done, Alicia. Well done, all of you. Lovely to see you all, and I wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you very much. And amazingly, we're on time. It's 4 o'clock. And I wish we had more time to actually have a discussion following all these amazing presentations, but I fear we might be kicked out of the room shortly. But I would like to say a massive thank you to everyone who came here, who made the trek and graced us with your presence in person and online. Everyone who committed their afternoon to talking and hearing about learning development. We loved working with all of you who we worked with. It was a very positive experience for our first book. First, because we're planning and doing more, because it was such a great experience. So thank you all. Karina, did you want to add anything? I'm all good. I hope you enjoy this dinner party then. And on to the real one, maybe in some drinks. But hopefully we'll have some opportunities to continue these conversations in other settings. Thank you very much.